Breaking overnight, trade tensions with China escalating again 3 weeks after both countries agreed to slash tariffs on one another by 115% for 90 days.
Today, the U.S. is building its own wall against China, not with stones and bricks, but through customs tariffs.
The announcement comes after days of verbal sparring from both sides, with Chinese officials clapping back at the Trump administration, calling on the U.S. to cease discriminatory restrictions, and President Trump's fiery attack on social media, where he accused China of violating the trade truce meant to roll back tariffs.
After days of poker faces and silence leading to an escalation in rhetoric and headlines, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping finally got on a call. With the entire global economy firmly in the balance, the two presidents discussed the ongoing trade war. Now, headlines have been playing it safe on both sides. They've painted the call as a positive step and something of a reset, but this wasn't really diplomatic courtesy if we're being honest. It was the next step in this major economic standoff, one that is shaping the global supply chain as we speak. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can beat the YouTube algorithm. There's a lot on the line, from financial markets to a race for vital minerals. No wonder the call lasted well over an hour. Both U.S. and Chinese sources confirm what the media has been saying. The talks were constructive and productive. Trump labeled it a good conversation, while Jinping's response was hardly more than a nod. Fortunately for the global economy, there were no public outbursts, at least no walkouts and no humiliation rituals. But don't think for 1 second that it was anything more than a pause. The call didn't result in peace. It only discussed the possibility of it. Both leaders extended invitations to each other, which were apparently accepted. Trump revealed plans to visit China with the First Lady and hopes that Jinping will bring his wife over too, but the temperature in China read the call a little differently. Chinese state media revealed that while the call included an invitation, there were also talks about withdrawing the negative measures the U.S. had taken against China. Of course, state phone calls are the highest form of diplomacy, so there are signals and warnings through words. Core issues couldn't possibly be covered on a call, so they remain in the background, unresolved and slowly getting hotter. But the talk was enough to get both parties back on the table with expectations that formal talks should resume in the coming weeks. But it'd be foolish to imagine that this little dance is about balancing exports and imports. No matter how much China's economy depends on manufacturing and exports, there's no way this trade war has anything to do with tariffs only. This is a power play. This is a way of seeing which country blinks first. And it's all about access and dominance over the industries of the future. As per Xinhua, a state news agency in China, Trump was told that China has always honored the accord the two countries agreed to in Geneva, and expects the U.S. to do the same.
And frankly, what the Chinese have done over the last 25 or 30 years is they've cornered the market.
At the same time, the conversation has now moved on from tariffs to rare minerals. Apparently for the U.S., that is where the problem lies. As far as President Trump is concerned, nothing will be resolved unless China loosens its grip on rare earth minerals, which are essential for powering electric vehicles, smartphones, military-grade tech, etc. For the U.S., that's the biggest problem because more than 90% of the world's rare earth refining takes place in China. That's where Xi's leverage lies. And as they control the bottlenecks, Trump's grip on world affairs loosens a little bit.
And President Trump also said the conversation with President Xi of China was all about trade. They did not discuss Russia or Iran, but certainly a big sign that the White House is progressing at least a little bit when it comes to trade talks with China, which are at the core.
Ultimately, the question is, what did the call actually achieve? Well, in the short term, it promises stability and cools the temperature. On both sides, negotiators have more time. And with this breathing space, they can maybe come to terms with new deals. The dollar has already hit a near 3-year low, and exporters are feeling the heat from the weight of the tariffs. In the medium term, it opens a very narrow window. There's a chance that both sides can come to a solution without escalating the war into a full-scale economic showdown. But beyond that, it's anybody's guess. Nothing's been solved, and all signs point to the simple fact. This is only a momentary pause. The trade war has only just begun. Which brings us to the biggest question. How did we get here? Why did Donald Trump ramp up the pressure with these tariffs in the first place? And why have rare earths become such a crucial part of America's national security now? Let's rewind a little to the starting point. To really understand everything, we need to go back to Trump's first campaign in 2016. Do you remember what he talked about apart from building a wall? Yeah, those promises about America not getting ripped off on trade anymore, and how China was the biggest enemy in this regard because they were taking advantage of weak American leadership to shut down factories and take all their jobs.
The global markets take a hit today after President Trump threatened to slap more tariffs on China. It's a bad sign for trade talks between the two countries, which are set to begin Wednesday.
So, Trump promised change. Tariffs quickly became something of an everyday tool under his leadership, and they were more than just policy instruments. They became political symbols. It was basically a full toolkit of a broader narrative, protecting American industries, punishing anyone taking advantage of America, and ultimately bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as Trump possibly led the nation to believe. Tariffs don't reshape trade balances only, they also impact the entire global economic order. Over the course of the last few decades, the U.S. led with a simple policy. Globalization is good. Offshoring was simply the next step in efficiency, and it was good to imagine supply chains as intentionally borderless. But Trump wasn't buying into it. His team maintained that dependence on geopolitical rivals was the biggest undoing of the U.S., and to fix that, he needed to implement tariffs. That's where China comes in. If anything, China is very much the center of the whole argument. For many years, Americans have been wary of China's rise, but with multilateral and cooperative deals, they were just about dealing with it. But Donald Trump flipped the script completely with confrontation. From blaming the Chinese for currency manipulation to state-sponsored aggression and intellectual property theft, he really didn't hold back. All of the previous administrations came under fire for allowing China to get away with it all. And then this time, in his presidency, he did the unthinkable. He went all out with incredible tariffs, igniting perhaps the biggest trade war of the century and risking the entire global economy.
It is access to raw material and industrial capacity that is at the core both of the decisions that we're making and the areas that we're prioritizing.
Then rare earths enter the conversation, because no matter what the general media wants you to believe, those rare minerals are very much at the center of the problem. That's where the strategic fight happens, because without those materials, you can't gain a competitive edge. You can't make phones, you can't make military-grade equipment, and you can't get ahead. They consist of 17 metals, and while names like yttrium and dysprosium might not be the first on your lips, they're the very reason you have a working phone. It's the very reason militaries around the world can have guidance systems in their missiles. And those elements are what power electric vehicles too.
They're interested in the short term in dominating the market, being the sole source provider for the world of a certain product. Because once you establish industry dominance in any one of these fields, you can charge the world whatever you want.
But what do those materials have to do with China and the USA? Well, China doesn't just produce those elements, it refines them and has the advantage over everyone else. That's why, when Trump went ballistic with tariffs in 2019, the Chinese simply hinted at restricting rare earth exports. It was their signal of retaliation, and suddenly the whole of Silicon Valley and California were worried, with alarm bells ringing all over the U.S. Over the last 5 years, the Trump and the other thinkers in the back room have had plenty of time to revisit their strategy. And that's why this time's trade war is very much dependent on minerals. Then again, those minerals are so important that the sovereignty and independence of countries depend on the very minerals that China controls. So this is Trump's way of getting some leverage back. He wants China to rethink its economic security and wants to ensure that the U.S. doesn't remain dependent on China for these minerals. On the other hand, the message from Xi Jinping has plenty of layers too. They're not holding back either, and while the Chinese have shown a willingness to hold more talks, it can't be mistaken for a compromise on the control they have.
Yeah, I don't think any specialists that look at this most important bilateral relationships are convinced that there's any substantial change in the tensions and the competition between the two.
That's why this moment is very volatile and unique. It's not about what Trump does next and how Xi responds. It's all about whether the current global economy can withstand a major trade war only a few years after COVID. But what's the situation like right now? Well, negotiators are back at the table. There's a lot of pressure from industries as well, as they're already feeling the impact with delays in chip production and manufacturers bracing for increased costs. All of that results in major changes as far as business is concerned. The broader tariff environment has already impacted supply chain management, And consumers are already facing higher prices and tighter supply, along with longer wait times on appliances and vehicles. Trump and the US are trying their best to assert economic independence, but they need to be careful because there's an extremely fragile economy that could be derailed completely with one misstep. In other words, there's no reason to oversell the phone call. It may be positive to see the two countries finally discussing everything, but there are no quick fixes. It will take time before we see some sort of resolution, and until that happens, industries need to prepare for the worst-case scenarios. Ultimately, it will all come down to whether the US can negotiate a better deal, and if China can come out of this trade war maintaining its growing monopoly on rare earths. Don't forget to check out our video on the dispute going on between John Deere and Trump.